compromise is within reach. We know where we agree. We can do this. Now it's been heartening to see a few hopeful signs in the past few days. After months of arbitrary attachment to sky-high dollar amounts that the Speaker of the House claimed were essential, those baseless claims have suddenly evaporated. That is at least movement in the right direction.
That qualifies as optimism nowadays in Washington. Mitch McConnell there with a note about the next round of stimulus. Still, though, he's complaining about the price tag. At least he's still not saying things like this.
We just don't have time to waste time. We have a couple of weeks left here.
Now, the waste of time is referring to the new $900 billion proposal that has some bipartisan support and includes all the things that you see there on your screen. Now, since McConnell's Senate has failed to even call a vote on the $2 trillion package that passed the House by Democrats months ago, and it hasn't come up for a viable alternative to this point, he is getting called out for not acting during the crisis.
Historians have suggested that in the year 64 AD, while Rome was burning, the Emperor Nero played his fiddle. At least he did something. He provided entertainment to his court. But here in the U.S. Senate, Republican leader McConnell and his leadership team are doing nothing.
So to pick up on that analogy, while Mitch is fiddling, tens of millions of Americans are, without any debate, struggling. Food lines have become common in several parts of the country as people run out of money to feed their families. Millions of people still out of work. Now, just last week, more than 700,000 Americans applied for jobless benefits again in just 1 week. Last week, I spoke with someone from the think tank called the Century Foundation. They say we are approaching a benefits cliff where 12 million Americans could lose their jobless benefits by Christmas if Congress fails to act. And this is a vicious cycle. With a health crisis causing a financial disaster and a surge in evictions, it is helping to fuel the pandemic here. Researchers at UCLA just released a study showing that people getting booted from their homes has caused nearly 500,000 COVID cases and 10,000 deaths, and things could get a lot worse for tens of millions of people as federal eviction protections are set to expire at the end of this month. My next guest led to that unpublished study, Kathryn Leifheit. She's an epidemiologist at the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health. She's kind enough to give us a few minutes. And, you know, Kathryn, when we look at this, I think for a lot of people, they say, oh, wow, you know, the hardship that this is causing, but they don't make the connection, or at least I didn't, with the public health component. But you guys have put a number on this as to how many people, you know, we can possibly attribute their deaths because they were put out of their homes due to COVID.
Yeah, that's right. I think what gets lost in the conversation of public health directives to shelter in place is that people need secure shelter. And one way that states and then the federal government acted to ensure that folks would have stable shelter was to put these eviction moratoriums into place. So states did it as early as March, and then on September 3rd, the CDC stepped in and set up a federal moratorium on evictions. And unfortunately, what we saw was the lifting of those state-level eviction moratoriums was associated with 430,000 more COVID cases and over 10,000 more deaths between March and September.
And we seem to be headed to a perfect storm potentially. December 31st is a very significant day. That's when the federal evictions moratorium expires. And I'm hearing numbers as many as 30 million people could be affected. Is that right?
So that's one number that's been cited for sure. The moratorium is set to expire December 31st. Like you said, that's only 4 weeks away. And we're in a setting where we're seeing over 1 million new COVID cases a week. So state and federal policymakers need to extend those protections to make sure that families and communities can stay safe.
And there's an additional issue further complicated, of course, by COVID. The calendar, you're going to have winter here. People obviously are going to have to find shelter if they're put out. But because of the conditions, you need to have separations for space. And these homeless shelters don't have that right now, let alone the wherewithal to house this amount of people. This logistical problem to go along with the health problem and also the psychological taxing this is putting on people at the most strenuous of times.
So homeless shelters are doing all they can to try and absorb people and try to space people as safely as possible. But we have seen some pretty dramatic outbreaks happening in homeless shelters across the country. Some cities have moved to put people up in hotels. There are a lot of vacant hotels lately. But the safest option, of course, is if we can just keep people in their homes.
And you say that this problem is not an equal opportunist. It's particularly hurting, obviously, the folks who can afford this least, and primarily minority communities.
That's right. So we know Black and Latinx families are more likely to be evicted. We also know that those are the same families that are bearing the brunt of COVID. So moratoriums can keep these families housed and safe during the pandemic, and they might also keep COVID disparities from growing larger than they already are.
And I assume this is particularly concerning in some of the bigger cities in this country.
Yeah, we think of evictions as sort of an urban phenomenon, but actually, if you look at some of the work that the eviction lab out of Princeton has done, they really happen all over the country. So cities are of major concern, but rural areas should also be keeping an eye on this issue.
I'm sorry, but I don't care where somebody falls in the political divide. The idea that we'd be putting people out in the dead of winter, in the teeth of a pandemic, it just is so nonsensical. But anyway, I appreciate both the time and the study you and your colleagues put out. Kathryn Leifheit, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, when we come back on January 20th, Donald Trump's going to become a private citizen whether he likes it or not. But the question is, will the GOP still be the party of Trump after he's gone? Well, after the break, a top pollster will sit down with Andrew to give the answers.